Hi, friend. Logan Clements here with the Better Events podcast. And in this week's episode, I'm sitting down with guest co host Julianne Read to talk about something that she is doing at many a fundraising dinner, luncheon, or event, and that is the Raise the Paddle. We are going to break down exactly what it is, how do you do it well at your event, and what makes a difference between a successful Raise the Paddle and one that maybe is a little less successful. And if you're someone who does not work in the nonprofit space, this episode still has some relevant tips for you where we talk about how you can apply some of the learnings from a great Raise the Paddle to your own event in creating those emotional high points. So without further ado, let's get into the episode.
Welcome to the Better Events Podcast. Join two event strategists, Logan Clements and Mary Davidson, who believe we can all create, host, and attend better events. In this podcast, you will learn about event strategy and actions that you can use today as an event host, planner, or manager. Hear directly from the people who are creating innovative and inspiring events today and tomorrow, and grow your business along the way. Now, let's get started, and thanks for listening to the Better Events Podcast.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Events Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Logan Clements, and I'm joined by a new guest co-host this week who I'm thrilled to introduce you to. But before I do that, I do want to plug the amazing on-demand workshop that Mary and I developed for how to start an event planning business. This is an in-depth, 5-hour on-demand session that Mary and I recorded before her maternity leave, where we go from literally starting the company to where we are now. We walk you through our process, lessons learned, things we wish we knew, as well as tons of templates. You guys are always emailing us about templates. So there are business contracts in there. There's scopes of work. There's pricing calculators. There's proposals. We even walk you through a sample sales call. So there's a lot in there, not just for new business owners, but if you are someone looking to just kind of revamp your own business, there's something for you. And while I can say all of the nice things about it, I do want to read one of our workshop attendees said, "The Better Events workshop was exactly what I needed to move forward with confidence. The lessons were practical, easy to follow, and packed with real-world insights. I walked away with a clearer vision for my business, actionable strategies, and tools I can implement immediately. Logan and Mary are absolute superstars in the event industry, and their passion for helping others succeed is evident through the entire workshop. Their knowledge and transparency and willingness to share what actually works makes this an invaluable resource for anyone looking to start or grow an event planning business. Highly recommend." So from them, not from us, we hope you take advantage of that. That is our workshop. Check out the show notes. But yeah, now I'm excited to bring on Julianne Read, who is my guest co-host for this next series of episodes. Julianne Read is a fundraiser-turned-event architect. Her company collaborates with clients to craft custom data-driven event experiences that create connection and drive impact. She specializes in nonprofit events that gather people, build lasting relationships, and celebrate community. With strategic fundraising woven deeply into every detail, she ensures every event not only shines in the moment, but sustains its mission long after the lights go down. Julianne, anything you want to add to that amazing bio?
I don't know. That was great. Thank you so much. I just think that nonprofits, individuals, and corporations invest really heavily in events. And so really understanding purpose and the activations and the goals of the event and being super intentional about that really elevate that intention and, being able to make the most of that investment.
Oh, so good. And you might recognize Julianne, folks, if you went to any of our Better Events conferences over the years. She's been both an attendee and was one of our speakers. She did an amazing workshop back in Seattle last December. So just thrilled to have you here. And as usual, we like to warm up with a conversation starter. So I am very curious for this one, Julianne. What is your favorite meal to cook and why?
All right. Let's see. Just in thinking about it, a big tradition in our family has been using the Alton Brown's carbonara recipe, which we have formed to our taste over time. And my family just loves it. We use it for celebration. We use it for a meal when everybody feels like they're home and that's their home cooked meal that they request. And you really just can't go wrong with bacon.
I'm going to have to put that recipe in the show notes. If you have that, you'll have to give me that link. People feel like I'm hungry already. I feel like for me, folks here on the podcast know that I'm not much of a chef. I like to say that I'm a lazy cook about different things. But I definitely, the one sauce that I've learned to cook from a recipe from scratch has been a influencer named, I think it's Grassi Palasi, and I will link it as well. He's a Brooklyn based chef, and it is vodka sauce. And it is
Oh,
one that you just have to
delicious.
stir for so long, but it is, and he says until it's like inappropriately thick is what you're trying to go for.
I love
And
that.
it is such good, like just so good. It's a good comfort meal. Right now we're summertime, so I'm not really craving a really hearty like sauce, but that is one when I have the patience and the energy in the colder months, you will catch me making that probably a couple times a month if I can.
Love that. That sounds amazing. Post that one too, so we have all of the fun recipes.
Yes, we'll get people ready for the winter. I don't know again if I gave a good summer one, but a little bit why we picked this topic. So we are going to be talking all about the anatomy of the raise the paddle, which those that are in the fundraising space and the nonprofit space, you're probably familiar with what that is. If you're coming from corporate or maybe social events, you're maybe unfamiliar with this idea, but there are going to be some takeaways, I feel like, no matter what type of event that you work. And I feel like this is such a key piece. That raise the paddle is such a key piece for any nonprofit event I've worked. And I'm really excited to dive into this with you today, Julianne, to help our listeners see kind of, or hear, I guess, about what are the do's and don'ts and kind of how to do one really well, because there is a difference between a well done paddle raise and one that kind of misses the mark. So we love to start broad on the podcast. Can you first define for our listeners what is a raise the paddle, or as I just called it, a paddle raise? You can use it interchangeably, but what is the raise the paddle moment?
Absolutely. Thanks so much. So Raise the Paddle effort is known by a lot of different names. It can be, you might have heard it called a fund a need, a special appeal, a direct ask, a mission moment. And effectively, it's the point during a fundraising event where a nonprofit will showcase its mission. They'll feature, possibly a story about someone who's benefited from their organization, and then guests are invited to invest in that mission.
Yeah, I definitely feel like I've seen the mission moment. It's, and I feel like funny because I'm not really realizing why there's so many paddles. I don't actually have paddles at the events I've worked with. It's usually like a bid card, like a bidder card, which in your
Right.
experience, has it been, did it used to be like, where did any idea where the word paddle came from? Was it because people used to have bidder paddles?
It definitely was. And I think that people use a bid card and paddle interchangeably. So at this point, I think most people know it as a bid card. Some people are using different ways as well. Some people are using mobile bidding for this and some other technology. And there's also some great opportunity now for community-based giving where nonprofits are using a QR code that's on a table tent or on the program. So people who might not be as comfortable raising a card up in the air to showcase what they're giving can give a little more quietly. So there's a lot of different ways to give, and we just sort of call it all a raise the paddle.
Very cool. All right. I'm learning something new myself. What is the most that you've ever seen a single paddle raise generate, and what made that room feel different?
I think what was interesting is it was interesting to see a nonprofit exceed $1 million during their paddle raise. It was fun to watch. I'm not going to lie. That was the first time this nonprofit had exceeded that milestone. So the energy in the room was insane. It was so much fun. And I think what I would start off by saying, just in terms of what made the room different, a good paddle raise doesn't start that night. A good paddle raise starts months before. And that's one of the most key things, is making sure that you have pre-committed gifts and also the opportunity for people to kind of jump on board throughout the evening. But I think it's really that it's about those donor relationships that you have before you enter the space.
Yeah, you kind of mentioned a couple key buzzwords, which I know you're going to
Yeah.
answer at this next question, but just can you walk our listeners through what the structure of a raise the paddle looks like? How do you like sequence those levels? And then if you want to share any like strategy behind why the order matters.
Of course, definitely. So pre-event structure is super, super important. And I know we'll talk a lot about this, and I know that you've been through this as well, but it's really understanding first who you're going to ask to tell your story that night. So is it a video that you're going to produce ahead of time that really communicates what the mission is? I think the most successful paddle raises I've seen really are when the mission is so keyed in and so on message and so on heart and on brand that everybody in that room can align with what you've said. Oftentimes they're very, very specific, even if they're actually fundraising for general operating funds, which is trickier in the fundraising world to raise than it is to say, we're going to feed X number of families or with the dollars raised tonight. So really the key part is deciding how you're going to tell the story, who's going to tell the story first. And then what's interesting too, and I like to kind of look back at the history of how paddle raises have come to take place. and really looking at the show run. So where this ask takes place within your event is really, really important. A paddle raise used to be used as a cleanup at the end of the event. So if someone didn't win a live auction item, then they had a chance to give and clean up at the end with that. And so what's happening now is that people are getting much more transformational with giving rather than transactional. So we say that it's important to put your paddle raise right in the central part of your event. And so if you're doing live auction items, you can do a few and then do your paddle raise in the middle, maybe continue on past that, or just have a few auction items, then go right to your paddle raise in terms of timing. So that's super important from a show run perspective. And then as we look at giving levels, this is where my nerdy brain takes a look back and says, you have to look at last year's data and previous year's data. You have to see who's scheduled to come to your event and really start the analysis there. And that's where you look at your different levels of giving. So one of the examples I like to share is that I started working with a client and their highest level of ask was $5,000. And in reviewing their previous 2 years of data, they had more than 15 people who were giving at that level, which to me as an event strategist is to look at that and I say, well, why aren't we doing a $10,000 level? One of those people is going to stretch a little bit. They just haven't been asked to do it yet. So we look at those levels and say, okay, let's look at your data. Let's see who's already given at this level. Or maybe nobody gave at your highest level. Maybe you started at 50,000 and nobody gave at that level last year. So if you don't have a pre-committed ask at that level that somebody has said yes to, then maybe you start a little bit lower. So it's really analyzing that data first. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then just like basics with structures too, I'm thinking like it always starts high, right? You start with your highest level and you go all the way down to your lowest, which we do talk on this podcast. We talk about even with like our rates and our own personal pricing. It's like expensive to one person is inexpensive to another. Like it's so arbitrary. So you kind of hinted a bit, but if there's any other tips you have of how people structure it, because some of those jumps, the different events I've been to, the levels have been widely different. Like there's not one standard of like you said, always start at 5 or always start at 10. Sounds like you start organization, like looking inward before you set those levels. Does that sound right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I like 6 or 7 levels. I like to, again, starting high is great. And you can always fish one level above what you have a pre-committed gift coming in at, which is important to do because there's going to be, if you have told an effective story and your guests are having a great time that night, like you've hit all the notes of, it's been a great guest experience. As a guest, I knew where I was supposed to be, what I was supposed to do, how I was asked to participate. I knew all of those things before getting to that moment of ask, and that you've built kind of this crest of the event so that when you reach that pinnacle of saying, we're now going to ask you for dollars, it's much easier for me as a guest or a donor to say, yes, I want to give now because I feel comfortable. I feel welcome. I feel like I understand why I'm here. And so all of those pieces, and then I feel like how I'm important to the story of this mission. So I like 6 or 7 levels. I think that's plenty. I think once you start getting at 10, 11, 12 levels, you exhaust people. And that's not what we're looking for. Again, we're looking for this lovely, lovely crest to ask. And then I think it's important to have a really good low level as well. So something that's an entry point for the donors in your space. You're going to have guests there and there's a continuing trend to invite beneficiaries of your organization to your fundraising events. So you want to make sure that there's a way for that guest to participate as well, or your nonprofit employees as well. So that's super, super important. We are in the business of inviting people to the table because we just don't know when that next windfall is going to come for someone. And we want them to continue to give and want to share in the cause.
Yeah, it's kind of like investing, in future donors and things. Yeah. And you mentioned an important part here that I want to go into a bit of talking about having predetermined donors. And I know this from being like show calling and stage managing that we'll get told this. And I thought you made a good point. So this is for listeners to know where the organization has already ahead of this event approached this donor, and this donor has said, yes, I'll raise my paddle at $10,000. They've already said, yes, they're going to do it. Cause I always think my brain's more on the show run of things. Like you were saying, Julianne, of like, this is your emotional high peak of the show. Exactly. This is you want then there to feel this like momentum. I think of it like debt payoff, which sounds funny when we're asking people to give, but where they say it's that avalanche method. So how things build up, pick up speed as you go down. So starting with, you have a donor that then that next level down, maybe you've got another donor, but now 2 have felt inspired. So it's picking up momentum. And there is a power of folks seeing other people donate in the room and seeing that bidder card go up. So having those predetermined methods, which I know is so hard for newer organizations that haven't tried this before, of knowing where to start. So I don't know if you have any tips for folks who are struggling to know how to make that one. How do you make the ask to the predetermined folks? And then how do you even craft the ask in the room? You've talked about video and that mission message, but any other tips for how people tee them up for that paddle raise?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as we look at, and again, I go back to the data. So just if anyone who's given to your organization, like let's say, for example, you have Mr. and Mrs. whomever, or whoever that guest might be, or that donor who has given to your organization in the past year. Maybe they haven't attended an event. Maybe they haven't. Maybe they give at the end of the year. And so you kind of make a list of those people and you say, okay, who gives, let's say at $1,000. We want those people to be invited. And we want those people to give also. So I think that, from your advancement or development standpoint, it's building that relationship out ahead of time. So it's making that list. And it used to be called, and it might still be called, the pyramid of asks. So you start with people who will give it high levels. You ask them for a gift. And then you kind of work your way through your levels. You really want people in the room who care about what you're doing and who are either willing to raise their paddle to, again, build that momentum, or who might make a gift in matching, which is kind of a tip and trick I love to throw out there. It's important to have a match. And so you might have a donor who says, I want to give you $25,000, but I am uncomfortable raising a paddle in the room. I don't want people to know it's me. So what's great is you can say, what I'd love to offer you is an anonymous match opportunity. So if you will give us that $25,000, then we can use that at our $1,000 level. And we'll basically let our $1,000 donors know that their match or their gift will be matched up to $25,000 that night. And that is really huge for people. It gives your donor what they're looking for. So they don't want to be known, they want to be anonymous, but they also want to make a big impact with their gift. And they will, because now all of a sudden, somebody who might have given at your $500 level will now bump up knowing that their gift will be doubled on top of that.
Yeah, the match is an interesting one because I know talking about, again, show run in my head of like when you announce that, I think it is a nice way to get an anonymous donor, but it is one that I sometimes have struggled with some of my nonprofit clients where they've kept that a secret even from me as like the stage manager. And then in the moment are trying to communicate it's a match and you're trying to get that message to the MC on the stage while they're on a microphone. And it's just one that I know I love a surprise and delight. I talk about it here on the podcast, but there's some of these things where I'm like, it's not a true surprise. I get it. Some people get emotional in the moment and then they will say, to your point, that person said I would match the first 25. Maybe they say, oh, actually, I'll go up to the first 35 because they're in the room and they see the power of all the people donating. That's different.
Right.
I would say
Totally.
if you have certain donors, or same, it's like we know we're going to have an ask. We know someone's going to raise their paddle and they're going to be in this area of the room. That, again, any of that kind of like staging notes that we can pass to stage manager, to your talent on stage, just to help it look, again, they don't have to like telegraph it, but it just helps them know where they're expecting that person to be. Or if that match is happening, again, it might change how they word the setup for that kind of give. But that just came to mind as you were saying that. I've definitely had some clients who also like play that close to the chest and don't want to share that information. That it's like, it's really helpful to know that ahead of time.
No, this falls into my auction theatrics area of business where I like to talk to clients about that up front and say, what's great is when we have this and this energy in the room and we're making this magic. The people who really need to understand the magic are the person who's in charge of your show run and your talent on stage. And yes, the in the moment stuff is fun, but we can also script that a little bit. And I like to script it a lot. I like the fundraising host to know who has given a certain amount if the donor is willing to be part of that energy and that excitement. But the true in the moment things can be fun. But again, this is your largest part of the night, the opportunity that you are having the most number of gifts come in. You want it to be very strategic and very well played out. So if something else does happen and somebody magically says, I'm in at $50,000 just for the fun of it, great. We'll find a way to take those dollars. But you want to build in some of the theatrics, some of the excitement of the night, and you need your team internally to be on board with that.
And that's a good point with your scripting. I'd love to have you kind of talk a bit about what kind of strategy you put behind prepping any of your kind of on stage talent, whether that's your host or your MC. Like, what does that look like? And I would love to know where things go wrong. I will first preface, I've definitely witnessed a little bit of it going wrong where it's either the scripting wasn't fully robust and built out,
Right.
or the actual talent was unprepared. There was a script, but clearly they hadn't had time to digest it or took the time ahead of arriving on site to digest. And that's one that I always personally felt pain, because I know there's so many people behind the scenes, to your point, who've spent hours and hours and weeks and months of energy on this, that it all comes down to, oh, we just didn't get the script right. And that hurts my heart for how much effort I know goes into some of these events.
Oh, completely. Your script is super, super critical. And even if your fundraising host may or may not follow a script all the way, the most that I like to really dial that in. So the opportunity for success is at its maximum potential. So we start a couple weeks out in terms of writing the script for the Raise the Paddle portion. We meet with our fundraising hosts a couple of times. We need them to really understand why we're asking for what we're asking for. We need them to be on board with mission and cause. And then we also do like to ask them, what their preferences are. So if there's something that builds to their strengths, then we'll build that into the script. If there's something that they've seen that's worked for a similar nonprofit, we love to collaborate with our talent on that. The things that can go wrong, and these are really show run based, right? I think I like paddle raise to run about 12 to 16 minutes total. So, and that's my sweet spot for being able to communicate a message, go through the levels, have some fun with the matching gifts, and keep that momentum going. Where it can all go wrong is when your well-meaning, well-loved executive director decides that it is a 15-minute talk that they want to give on what is happening within the nonprofit, and they see globally what's happening, and you need them to focus on message for why you're raising funds that particular night. So not having that portion script is a big miss. So too much information and too much talking during that time. There's other things that can go wrong. Not having a way to accept the funds. I've seen a nonprofit get to their event night and they did not tee up their giving software. So now we have all these people who want to give, and we had to shore up some things that were unexpected that night in terms of not being able to accept particular types of gifts. Let's see. One thing that can really go wrong, and I think that maybe some caterers might get super upset with me about this, but your Raise the Paddle needs to take place before dessert, and there should not be the smell of coffee in the room. Like, you are, from a service perspective, like, you need to be at that sweet spot of they've had dinner, they may have had one or two cocktails or a non-alcoholic, but they're not ready for coffee, dessert, and to relax into the rest of their evening. So we are taking them up on that crest again. Also, I love it when, and I require it at my events, I have all service off the floor during Raise the Paddle. Everyone's focus should be on what's happening on stage and what's going on at that point. And if service is on the floor starting to serve dessert, and I remember I had to run over to a caterer one night and say, please stop placing desserts on tables now. We are not there. And it says it in your run of show and it says it in your script. Please join us in making sure that this event is successful. So those are some big ones that are important. I guess the other one that sometimes gets to me is sometimes fundraising hosts are very comfortable as auctioneers. And so they're really comfortable auctioning items at great prices, but they will blast through every level because they're uncomfortable with the space that sometimes happens. I think a little uncomfortable space is okay during paddle raise. Not a long period of time. It doesn't need to be, 2.5 minutes per level, but something where maybe they've had a little conversation with a guest over here and they say something crazy like, oh, well, we're just going to hang here for a minute and see if anybody will raise their paddle, but how was your day? And so it gives people in the room just kind of a pause and a moment of entertainment. And then sometimes someone will put their paddle up at that level, or maybe they'll make a joke about, we needed 5 people at this level. Oh, what I meant to say was we need 7. So, just kind of keeping that pacing moving, but allowing space for people to think about giving.
Yeah, being comfortable with the silence, I feel like, is an important one. I've seen this executed really well too with an event I worked that had an auctioneer and a host, and they let the auctioneer lean into being the auctioneer and running the pacing of the items, but then they leaned more onto the host with the scripted piece of explaining more about the items, and or for the giving levels, they gave them bullets to talk about what these levels could help achieve. And I thought that was a really nice way to kind of balance it out and slow down the auctioneer from trying to kind of speed through anything. It is something I always joke, even as a moderator of doing any kind of virtual virtual experience or even in-person experience is like, yeah, you have to be okay with a little bit of silence, because some people, it just takes a little extra time for them to process, just even to say anything, let alone if you're doing a raise the paddle, you're asking people to donate. And that is sometimes, you'd hate to have rushed out and left some money on the table.
One of the
No, go
things
ahead.
that's interesting too is that oftentimes our auctioneers and fundraisers come out of television or radio. And so dead air is a real thing to them. So they're uncomfortable necessarily with a little bit of space, and a little bit of space is fine.
I feel like another pro tip that I would have, because I've been present also to this where we've panicked, is you got to, and I'd want to know, what is your correct amount of recorders for a paddle raise? And can you first explain to our audience, what are recorders and what do they do during paddle raise?
Exactly. No, that's huge. Totally, totally huge. So basically, recorders are people who write down bid numbers at each level as they're coming in. And those people are actively tracking how many dollars are coming in and what's going to be raised for your organization. It's a super, super critical role. You definitely have to have at least one. I like two, just in case somebody hears one thing and somebody hears something else. We've also started recording audio from an audio standpoint, all of our auctions and all of our paddle raises. It just helps organizations have some additional data in case a donor comes back and says, I didn't donate that, which happens at every event. So, there's always somebody who says, I didn't do this, but at least you have it written down by two different individuals, plus you have an audio recording. And again, so that your data can accurately be tracked and you can charge your donors the right amount.
Yeah. And like logistically, you have a table for those recorders, ideally in the front of the room, so they're visually looking, but your auctioneer will usually repeat bid numbers twice. But as Julianne, you also pointed out, usually your organization wants a total at the end of the night. So that's also important for them to have kept track of what levels things are at. Mary and I have been a part of an event where I will out her that she panicked that she didn't see any recorders for the organization. It was not in our scope. It was not our role at all. And she started frantically writing down numbers, which I love her for.
Yes.
And it did end up being helpful because some of the recorders weren't totally paying attention, that it was like, oh my gosh, this is your moment to capture, as you said, this is kind of your high point for fundraising. So very important. And while a volunteer can do it, it needs to be, in my mind, like a very high, like a high level volunteer, someone who has an attention to detail and like a little bit of buy-in and stakes in the organization versus your average person off the street, just because it's a crucial role and more important than just welcoming people.
Exactly. And my preference is not to have a volunteer recorder. It's great if you want to have one, but if it's somebody from your organization who works for you, who is bought into mission, that's super important. We always bring a recorder just because I don't want to leave that to chance ever. And sometimes auctioneers will bring their own recorders as well. So I utilize all of those people, and then I just provide a standard form so that everything is as accurate as it can possibly be, because that is the most important part of your night.
And if you're a listener that's like, oh my gosh, I haven't thought of recorders, please ask this question. Again, it's a better problem to have 3 recorders instead of none, but you do want to make sure, to your point, it's usually helpful to have somebody from the client side who's going to be one of those recorders. And the bigger the room, I'd say the more recorders you need, just to make sure that that is accurate. Well, we're coming towards the end of time, but I do want to ask if you have like every event that's not just fundraising has a moment where they're asking the room to do something, or they're trying to do some kind of call to action. Do you have any tips that like a non-fundraising planner could borrow based on your experience with Raise the Paddle?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most important thing is at the very beginning of the process, and I know that you and Mary have talked about this a lot, it's really goal setting for the night. What is it that you want your guests, your attendees to feel either at your event or when they leave? And so when you're being intentional about what that ask is, in every meeting that you're together and you're talking about what that goal is, that to me is setting the stage for really understanding what your takeaway is that you want for your guests. I recently attended this. We happened upon it. My daughter and I were walking through a public park in Omaha, Nebraska recently, and we happened upon the Water Lantern Festival. And people could purchase a water lantern, they could write something on the side of it, and then they were going to send them off into kind of this pond area that is located at that park. And it was really interesting because not a fundraiser, but they offered an opportunity for people to stand up on a stage with a microphone and share what's written on their lantern. And there were stories of love and stories of grief, and people took just a moment of time to acknowledge that. There was connection that was built that was fascinating. There's a young man who was sitting in front of us. He went up and spoke. He came back down. There was a guy who probably was a grandpa sort of age who high-fived him and congratulated him on his confidence on getting up to that stage and sharing what he was feeling. And so building those small moments, that's what we're looking for the central part of any event. It's to connect people, to help them feel like they're closer to one another and to build those relationships.
And while you're doing human connection, having that kind of goal as well as that more concrete, I feel like is the really important through line too with those. If I was a listener who had a gala coming up in the next few months, maybe even weeks, who knows?
Yeah.
What is one thing that you would tell them they should change or do at their paddle raise right now?
I think it's just really analyzing your raise the paddle portion of the night. This is, again, the florists and the decor people in the world are not going to love this moment, but really diving into what is it that you want people to feel and where do you want them to give and share of their resources, and focus on that. So whether you're creating your video or you have someone who's going to get up and share a story, being super intentional behind that and looking at the timing for that. And again, 12 to 16 minutes is just about right. Quick intro by your host, then moving into your storytelling and then asking for funds. So those are really, if you can change that today, and that will make a tremendous difference. And then also just asking for those pre-committed gifts. Oh, wait, I have one more. I love a little bit of bidder recognition. So I like it when there's somebody who's on stage who is either recognizing the donors who've given at a certain level. A lot of people who raise their paddle would appreciate someone saying, thank you so much, bidder number 126, the Jones family. We appreciate your gift tonight. And you can extend that through and you can either put it up on screen or you can have someone read it, but it's a nice way to connect the gift to the person, to the mission.
Yeah, not just a number. I know we've executed that with, I think, an event you and I did together we just gave the bidder list. We were able to give that to one of the hosts on stage. So it always took a second. And then when there was tons of numbers, it wasn't possible, but that was also good filler if needed. My other, I think, tip I would give folks, and this is just in general, you talked about timing being so important, and sometimes your executive director or your CEO or your president has that overarching strategy, to your point, that is just so much. And I had an organization I worked with that didn't do a raise the paddle, but did do a giving moment where they just it was all online. And they found that they needed to kind of almost create another event, like a separate webinar for their executive director to be able to really dive into the weeds. It was a science-backed organization. So there's just all this great research and science that these parents of these families that were impacted by the science wanted to know about, but it was it didn't fit. It just felt like it was kind of trying to fit, around into a square hole kind of thing. It always felt shoehorned. And so we were trying to get them to go shorter for the event, but they ended up wanting to go longer for other things. And we ended up just creating a second webinar to be let's give you just a taste of the science and more the why, keep it concise in our event. And then they created a whole nother, and we had literally a QR code at the end of his little part of the presentation to say, hey, and in 2 weeks, I'm hosting a webinar. We're going to lay all of this out for you, answer all your questions. And that was a really nice, I'm sure event organizers are more than one event to organize. Oh no, but it was a really great way to achieve two goals without trying to shoehorn them in to the same event.
Super, super smart. I love that one. And it does make your event live a little longer too, which we've started talking about is just, following up and saying you spent X number of dollars on this event. Let's keep talking about it. And you can do that for months beyond your event. Here's the impact of your gift. Here's the thing we've done next. So really, really good stuff. I love that.
Yeah. Well, Julianne, you're going to be with us for the next couple episodes, but I do want to give you an opportunity to tell our listeners where they can find you.
Oh, great. Thank you. So you can find me on LinkedIn or at eefundraising.com. And you can also email me at julianne@eefundraising.com. Look forward to hearing from you.
Amazing. And that brings us to our bonus tip this week, which, Julianne, you have your first bonus tip. I'm going to toss it over to you.
So excited about this one. Again, the decor people not going to love me right now, but your best planning tool is not a mood board. It is last year's giving report. If you're doing any sort of fundraising, look at your previous year's data first. Super, super critical as you build out the structure and your show run for this year's event.
We love a data call to action. We love it. Appreciate you, Julianne. And that brings us to the end of this week's episode. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Better Events Pod. You can send us an email at bettereventspod@gmail.com. You can also connect with us directly on LinkedIn. Me, Mary, Julianne, we'd all love to hear from you. Just make sure you write that you heard about us through the podcast in that little note button before you hit connect. And if you want even more Better Events content, come join our private community over on Substack. We have a paid version and a free version. And we want to thank you for listening, and we'll be back in your feeds again next Wednesday.